Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the sources you shared and synthesize the complex, messy truth.
And today, we are taking a long, deep look into the poetic chaos of the Doors.
Specifically, we're focusing on the engine of their sound. Jim Morrison, Ray Manzarek, and Robbie Krieger.
Morrison, as the front man, he really defined the rebellious, intellectual, and utterly volatile spirit of the 1960s counterculture.
Yeah, even now, more than 5 decades after his death at 27, he is still the prototypical rock star. He's surly, sensual, deeply literary, and just profoundly mysterious.
But that's the thing, right? The standard narrative, that whole Lizard King myth, it just fails to capture the extraordinary intellectual and musical complexity that made the Doors so unique.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to go far beyond that persona. We've synthesized a comprehensive stack of biographical and critical sources to unpack the real complexity of Morrison's life.
We're talking his military background, his literary roots, that volatile persona you mentioned.
And crucially, the foundational roles of his co-founders, Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger, and of course, drummer John Densmore.
The context here is just so important. This was the project born out of cinematic and philosophical ambition in Los Angeles.
Right, not a garage.
Not a garage at all. They fused high literature with hard rock, which led to 6 highly successful studio albums in just 5 years, from 1967 to 1971.
It's an incredible run.
Their place in music history is just undeniable. Rolling Stone ranked them 41st among the greatest artists of all time. We're really looking at how this one volatile element, Morrison, was both contained and amplified by this extraordinarily skilled, philosophically grounded musical architecture.
Okay, let's unpack that genesis then. The fact that the band started in the lecture halls of UCLA and not a smoky club, that tells you almost everything you need to know.
It absolutely does. The intellectual core of the band was forged right there. Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek, the primary architects, they met while both were attending the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television, and they graduated together in 1965.
And Manzarek's journey to UCLA is often just glossed over, but it highlights just how educated this group really was. He didn't start in the arts.
No, not at all. He initially went to law school. He studied economics at DePaul University in Chicago. He even organized a concert there with giants like Sonny Rollins and Dave Brubeck.
So he was already deep in the world of complex music.
Exactly. It was only later that he switched paths and enrolled in UCLA's film program, eventually getting an MFA in cinematography. This background gave him this unique kind of discipline.
So if Manzarek represented that disciplined, analytical mind, what the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche would call the Apollonian principle, then Morrison was.
Pure Dionysian chaos.
Yep.
Absolutely. But, and this is key, Morrison was also intensely intellectual. He had a reported IQ of 149 in high school, and he was a voracious reader from a really young age. His final college work was in cinematography, studying figures like Antonin Artaud.
And this blend of highbrow academia and rock music is just so critical. Let's dig into the authors who truly shaped his style, because this isn't just surface-level poetry we're talking about.
No, his influences were dense and demanding. He was steeped in the French existentialists, the entire pantheon of beat writers, Kerouac, Ginsberg, Burroughs, and crucially, the French symbolist poets like Arthur Rimbaud and Charles Baudelaire.
And what did he take from them? What was the through line?
They all emphasized raw emotion, subjectivity, and just breaking free of poetic convention. It was about getting to a deeper truth.
But the conceptual foundation, the one that really provides the ultimate lens to view Morrison's entire persona, has to be Nietzsche.
Absolutely. Morrison was obsessed with Nietzsche's views on aesthetics and morality, particularly that tension between the Apollonian and the Dionysian.
Right, the Apollonian being logic, order, control.
Everything his military father would have valued. And the Dionysian represents passion, chaos, intuition, and, the destruction of all limits.
And this philosophical framework, this tension between order and chaos, it really did infuse his entire performance art. You see that Apollonian structure in Manzarek's precise academic approach to music.
And then the pure, unadulterated Dionysian release in Morrison's stage persona. He was literally carrying these dense, heady ideas onto the stage and acting them out in real time.
Which brings us to that mythical chance meeting on Venice Beach in mid-1965, just 40 days after they graduated.
It's an amazing story. Manzarek found Morrison looking, highly bohemian. Sources paint this picture of him living on canned beans and LSD for months, just subsisting on the edge.
It's a moment of pure serendipity. Manzarek convinces Morrison to sing some rough lyrics he'd been working on. These were raw versions of songs like Moonlight Drive, My Eyes Have Seen You, and Summer's Almost Gone.
And Manzarek instantly recognized the quality. He called the lyrics cool and spooky and realized immediately he had found rock group material.
Menzer was already in a band at the time, right?
Yeah, he was playing with his brothers in a group called Rick and the Ravens. But the true musical constellation, the Final Doors lineup, that didn't lock into place until they brought in Robbie Krieger on guitar and John Densmore on drums.
And here we get this fascinating counterpoint to Morrison's philosophical chaos. Manzarek, Krieger, and Densmore all met at transcendental meditation lectures.
Given by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, no less.
Wow.
This is a critical insight that's often overlooked, and it speaks directly to the inherent tensions within the group. Densmore famously said, there wouldn't be any Doors without Maharishi.
So the unifying spiritual element, this pursuit of inner peace and cosmic order, was shared by 3/4 of the band. It's that Apollonian structure again, working to stabilize the collective.
Right, but the sources are very clear that Morrison was not involved in those particular meditation classes.
So while the band's rhythmic and harmonic foundation was built on a search for spiritual order, the vocalist was seeking the exact opposite.
Philosophical liberation through chaos and transgression. This split is the absolute core of their creative tension. Did the spiritual grounding of the other three create the necessary stability for Morrison's Dionysian performance art to thrive?
I mean, it must have.
The intellectual, the cinematic, and the spiritual currents were all pulling at once.
Which naturally dictates the choice of the band name. They drew it from Aldous Huxley's influential 1954 book, The Doors of Perception.
And Huxley's title was itself a direct reference to a quote from William Blake's 1790 work, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell.
Which reads, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite.
Exactly. This name immediately cemented their intellectual and psychedelic identity. They weren't just a rock band. They were promising a spiritual and perceptual shift using the medium of rock and roll.
Okay, we have to turn to Jim Morrison himself, the myth and the man, because the persona he adopted was so profoundly shaped by his deeply complicated upbringing.
Right. He was the child of a U.S. Navy officer, George Stephen Morrison, who later became a rear admiral. And notably, he was the commander of U.S. naval forces during the 1964 Gulf of Tonkin incident.
That's a serious military background.
It was a semi-nomadic existence, typical of a high-ranking military family, always moving between bases. The structure was rigid, controlled, demanding. And a key piece of biographical detail about his youth involves the disciplinary style his parents used, which they called dressing down.
And this dressing down was essentially psychological punishment instead of physical, right? Designed to enforce control and submission.
That's it. The sources indicate it was a highly intense, controlled environment. Instead of, spanking, his parents would use this military-style discipline, relentlessly yelling at and berating the children until they were reduced to tears and acknowledged their failings.
It's hard to imagine a more direct psychological catalyst for the man who had spent his adult life seeking total chaotic freedom on stage.
The Dionysian Rebellion, as a direct response to the Apollonian military rigidity.
And that context makes the seminal, defining moment he always returned to even more loaded. The 1947 New Mexico car crash when he was just 3 or 4 years old.
Morrison described this incident as the single most formative event of his life, a primal trauma. He claimed that the spirits or ghosts of injured, dead Indians leaped into his soul. He said he was like a sponge, ready to sit there and absorb it.
And that trauma was the wellspring for so much of his lyrical imagery. The shamans, the lizards, the snakes, the desert. It's a constant return to that moment.
But the mythology around Jim is immediately complicated by the conflicting family accounts.
Right.
Precisely. His father said they simply drove past an accident that made an impression on him, which is a massive minimization of the spiritual experience Jim described. And his sister believed his version was dramatically exaggerated for effect.
This highlights a crucial theme. Jim Morrison didn't just sing about his life, he actively manufactured and mythologized it.
And that myth-making extended to his family. The estrangement was deep. He broke off almost all contact after UCLA. At the height of his fame, he falsely claimed his family was dead or that he was an only child.
Why? I mean, what was his justification for that?
He later said he did it to protect his father's Navy career from the scandal associated with the Lizard King and to keep his life completely separate.
But how much of that lifelong persona of rebellion do you think was a conscious reaction to the rigidity and explicit dismissal from his admiral father?
It's hard to separate the two.
Yeah.
Admiral Morrison was famously unsupportive of his son's career. He viewed it as a disgrace.
There's that letter, right?
Yes, in a staggering 1970 letter to the Florida Probation and Parole Commission, his father admitted that he had previously strongly advised him to give up any idea of singing because of what I considered to be a complete lack of talent in this direction.
Wow. That's brutal.
Brutal. That public dismissal from the ultimate authority figure surely fueled the rebellion, turning every chaotic performance into an act of defiance against the Apollonian order his father represented.
This feeds directly into the idea of the duality of Jim Morrison, the poet versus the rock star, which producer Paul A. Rothschild famously described as a classic Jekyll and Hyde personality.
Rothschild's observation is essential. He said when Jim was sober, he was Jekyll, the most erudite, balanced, friendly kind of guy. He was Mr. America.
The UCLA film student, the reader.
Exactly. But once the alcohol hit, he'd turn into a maniac pure Hyde, the Dionysian destroyer. The rock star persona became a vessel for his escalating destructive urges.
But his dedication to high art was absolutely genuine. He wasn't just performing the role of an intellectual, he was one.
Oh, completely. His literary pursuits were non-negotiable. He self-published 2 volumes of poetry during his lifetime, The Lord's Notes on Vision and The New Creatures.
The style of this poetry was deeply influenced by the symbolists' surreal, often stream of consciousness, dealing in fragmented images and cinematic structure.
Right. One line from the Lords describes his goal as breaking through the language screen, trying to express what couldn't be logically said.
And those posthumous collections, Wilderness and The American Night, they became instant bestsellers.
Which confirms that the poet was as much a commercial force as the singer.
And we have to loop back to his film background. He didn't just study cinema, he made his own experimental work.
In 1969, he financed and starred in the experimental film HWI, An American Pastoral. It was pure art house, a 50-minute piece where Morrison plays a hitchhiker who murders another man and steals his car. It was an exercise in cinematic cruelty.
Which directly reflects his academic interest in Antonin Artaud.
It does.
Okay, for the listener who hasn't delved into 20th century French theater, what does Artaud's theater of cruelty actually entail, and how did it influence Morrison on stage?
Artaud's core concept was that theater shouldn't just entertain or reflect reality. It should shock the audience, assault their senses, and bypass rationality to get to primal truths. It was designed to make the audience deeply uncomfortable.
And Morrison took that theoretical violence and applied it to a rock performance.
Exactly. When he taunted crowds, screamed obscenities, or tried to break down the barrier between performer and audience, he was enacting Artaud's philosophy. He was using the stage as a laboratory for cruelty and transgression.
That focus on visual poetry and transgression leads us right to his physical image. In 1966, he adopted that iconic black leather look that defined the early Doors era.
The black leather was crucial to his identity as a shamanistic performer. There are competing origin theories. Some say he was influenced by the Velvet Underground's Gerard Malanga. Others point to Marlon Brando in The Fugitive kind.
The mysterious anti-hero.
Right. And the biography, No One Here Gets Out Alive, even links the image to historical figures like Alexander the Great, a mythic warrior poet.
And regardless of where it came from, that look popularized leather pants as stereotyped rock star apparel. I mean, that legacy runs right through to U2's Bono using them for his fly alter ego decades later.
But by 1969, the persona shifted again. There was weight gain, a full beard, and more casual clothes, the jeans and slacks look. He was retreating from that manufactured sexual idol status, trying to shed the Lizard King for the more reflective American poet.
His personal life was just as fraught and contradictory as his public image, marked by many serious relationships, casual encounters, and a truly staggering 37 paternity actions pending against him at the time of his death.
It's unbelievable. The key romantic tension really revolved around 2 women. First, Mary Werbelow, his first love from 1962 to 1965.
Mansrick said she held a deep place in his soul.
She did. And it's fascinating to learn that the epic 10-minute track, The End, actually began as a short, innocent goodbye love song intended for her, before Morrison added the now infamous Oedipal section later on.
And then there was Pamela Courson, the tumultuous, open relationship that spanned his entire adult life from 1965 until his death in 1971. Despite all the chaos and infidelities, she was named the sole heir in his will.
Manzarek called Pamela Jim's other half, the only person who could complement his bizarreness. And crucially, she constantly encouraged his poetry, reinforcing his intellectual side and validating the poet, not just the sexualized rock idol.
Their connection, despite its instability, remained the central pillar of his emotional life.
But we also have to note the high-profile and sometimes violent encounters that showed how his drinking and Dionysian impulses could be truly destructive.
Like the alleged hand-fasting ceremony with rock critic Patricia Keneally.
Right. While a spiritual commitment was made, Keneally later admitted she doubted how seriously he took the ritual, suggesting it was just another performance for him.
And of course, the notorious encounter with Janis Joplin.
David Crosby told the story of Morrison treating Joplin cruelly at a party, which ended abruptly when she retaliated by hitting him over the head with a bottle of whiskey.
That moment just encapsulates the problem. Alcohol fueled this destructive, cruel behavior that contrasted so sharply with the sensitive, insightful poet. Joplin thereafter referred to Morrison as that asshole, which highlights how his increasing dependency blurred the line between philosophical chaos and just simple, ugly aggression.
Right.
When we talk about the Doors' music, Morrison's chaotic energy is the lightning bolt, but the band's sonic architecture, the very thing that allowed that chaos to be recorded and organized, was built by Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger.
They deserve incredible credit for creating a sound that was instantly recognizable, despite their very unusual lineup.
The unusual lineup being the defining characteristic. The absence of a permanent, dedicated bass guitarist in live performances. Manzarek's keyboard work was absolutely critical.
I mean, he had to essentially play two instruments at the same time.
So tell us about that signature instrumentation. How did he fill that bass void live, technically speaking?
Live, he was a spectacle of coordination. His signature psychedelic sound came from the Vox Continental combo organ, which he played with his right hand for the main melodies and leads. But simultaneously, his left hand was playing the crucial bass lines on a Fender Rhodes piano keyboard bass.
Right underneath the box.
Exactly. He was functioning as both keyboardist and bassist.
That's a highly sophisticated technique, essentially acting as two musicians at once. And he modernized that setup later on, didn't he?
He did. He later used a Gibson G101 for his main parts, and critically introduced the Moog synthesizer on their second album, Strange Days.
Okay, that fact that they used the Moog is often mentioned but rarely explained in context. Why did they use it, and what specific sound did it create that advanced their psychedelic ambitions?
The Moog was brand new technology at the time, and the Doors were among the first rock groups to embrace it. They weren't using it for typical pop melodies. They used it to create specific, atmospheric sounds unique to Strange Days, electronic whooshes, deep resonant textures, and sonic distortion.
So it defined the album's unsettling mood.
Completely. Think of the title track, Strange Days, where the Moog adds this ethereal, almost alien quality, pushing them further into that philosophical space of altered perception.
That explains why the record sounds so full. But here's the paradox I want to explore. If the band prided itself on being a unified four-piece, how do they rationalize bringing in external studio musicians for their defining recorded sound?
That's the deepest contradiction in their musical architecture. The sources explain that while Manzarek's keyboard bass was ingenious live, it often lacked the articulation, the sharp definition and attack needed for the final studio fidelity.
So they needed a real bass for the records.
Right. Session basses were used for the majority of studio recordings to add that necessary depth and precision. The most notable was Douglas Lubon, who played on 3 albums.
They also used guys like Jerry Scheff and Leland Sklar.
Highly respected studio players. It was a compromise the band made to achieve maximum sonic impact on vinyl, even if it compromised their self-image as a tight quartet.
And Manzarek wasn't just the rhythmic backbone, he was an integral vocal presence too.
Absolutely. He was the regular backing vocalist, providing the necessary counterpoint to Morrison's baritone. But he also sang lead when Morrison was unavailable, like on the live Muddy Waters cover, Close to You, and the bluesy, playful You Need Meat, Don't Go No Further.
Okay, moving to Robbie Krieger. He is perhaps the most underrated element in the band's success. The accidental songwriter who wrote or co-wrote so many of their biggest hits.
And he wasn't a traditional rock musician. Krieger was self-taught, which is crucial. He began on a ukulele that he detuned to mimic a guitar, illustrating this natural, untutored approach to sound.
His style was this magnificent melting pot.
Right. Influenced heavily by sophisticated jazz guitarists like Wes Montgomery and the raw power of electric blues masters like Albert King. But the truly unique element was his immersion in classical Spanish music.
He was a deep student of flamenco guitar. You can really hear that in tracks like Spanish Caravan.
That complex, syncopated rhythm and passionate melodicism is all over their work. He also had a distinctive technique frequently using a bottleneck slide or a fingerstyle approach on his electric guitar, which added this raw blues texture to even their most psychedelic tracks.
And the power of his songwriting is just undeniable. We are talking about staples like Light My Fire, Love Me Two Times, Touch Me, Love Her Madly. This runs completely counter to the general narrative that Jim Morrison was the sole creative force.
It fundamentally reshapes the narrative. While Morrison provided the vast majority of the lyrics and vocal melodies, the other band members and Krieger most often contributed the core, chords, rhythm, and harmonic structure.
He wrote the music for Light My Fire.
He wrote the music and suggested the title phrase. He was providing the foundational musical structure that allowed Morrison's poetry to take flight.
And just like Manzarek and Densmore, Krieger shared that deep non-rock influence. Both he and Densmore famously studied under the celebrated Indian sitarist Ravi Shankar.
That shared study in Indian classical music speaks volumes. It wasn't just a casual interest. It was a commitment to exploring consciousness and sound beyond the conventional Western rock format.
It was the necessary Apollonian order.
The order that enabled the Dionysian chaos.
We shift now to the whirlwind period of peak success and ensuing crisis, starting with their debut, The Doors, in 1967. They signed with Elektra Records, and the album was an instant game-changer.
It was a rapid ascent. The single Light My Fire, co-written by Krieger, became their first #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 in mid-1967. They went from opening for acts like Simon and Garfunkel to national headliners almost overnight.
And that success led directly to the national scrutiny and the infamous Ed Sullivan Show scandal in September 1967.
This is pure Artaud's theater of cruelty meets network television censorship. The censors demanded a lyric change, insisting that the line, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," be altered to, "Girl, we couldn't get much better," due to perceived drug references.
But Morrison, the ultimate provocateur, sang the original line anyway on live national television.
Accounts slightly conflict on that. Some suggest it was a clear act of defiance. Others, including Manzarek, have suggested it was nerves and that Morrison simply forgot the forced alteration.
Either way, the result was the same.
The result was the same. Ed Sullivan was livid, refused to shake their hands, and canceled 6 planned subsequent bookings. Morrison's defiant reply to the producer was the perfect rock star quote, "Hey man, so what? We just did the Sullivan Show."
Their next albums followed quickly. Strange Days in 67 and then Waiting for the Sun in 68, which featured their second #1 hit.
Waiting for the Sun became their first and only U.S. #1 album. The hit was Hello, I Love You, an older demo song they resurrected. Interestingly, that single sparked a copyright infringement concern from the publisher of the Kinks, All Day and All of the Night.
Because of the musical similarity.
It's undeniable. The publisher ultimately chose not to sue, but it shows how quickly the band was pulling material from their old portfolio to meet demand.
And the controversies just kept escalating, culminating in the New Haven arrest in December 1967, which truly cemented Morrison's image as the untamed shaman.
This was a bizarre, escalating confrontation. Before the show, Morrison and a woman were found making out in a shower stall backstage by a police officer who failed to recognize him. When ordered to leave, Morrison's mocking reply was, "Eat me." He was promptly maced.
And he did not let it go.
No, he took the stage late, but instead of singing, he launched into this obscenity-filled improvised story about the little man in blue who had maced him.
Which led New Haven police to arrest him on stage for indecency and public obscenity.
He was led off stage mid-performance, becoming the first rock performer ever arrested during a show. It solidified his identity as the ultimate provocateur.
By the time they approached their 4th album, The Socked Parade in 1969, Morrison's descent into alcoholism was becoming a real, crippling problem.
He was increasingly difficult, late, drunk, and unreliable. The making of The Soft Parade was a struggle marked by internal conflict. Producer Paul Rothschild suggested the radical departure of bringing in brass and string arrangements.
A true Apollonian attempt to impose musical order.
Right. And while Manzarek and Densmore liked the idea, Morrison resisted, viewing the arrangements as antithetical to their raw sound.
And this resistance fractured the band's previous collaborative structure.
It did. This album was the first time individual songwriting credit was given for each member, rather than the unified The Doors. This was specifically due to Morrison's reluctance to sing the lyrics of Robbie Krieger's song, Tell All the People.
Despite the critical attacks and internal friction, it was still a major commercial hit.
Which illustrates the strength of their fan base. But the real crisis, the incident that ended their ability to tour freely, arrived 3 months later with the infamous Miami Dinner Key Auditorium incident in March 1969.
This was the most consequential performance of their career?
The venue was a massive, non-air-conditioned seaplane hangar, dangerously overcrowded, 12,000 people packed into a 7,000-capacity facility on a suffocatingly hot night. Morrison was visibly drunk and arrived over an hour late to a restless, overheated crowd.
And he used the stage to taunt them.
Drawing directly from his theater of cruelty studies, he shouted obscenities, things like, "You want to see my cock?" and challenged the audience, "What are you going to do about it?" This erratic, confrontational behavior led to 6 arrest warrants being issued for indecent exposure and public obscenity.
It's crucial to remember the band members' denial of that core charge.
Yes. All surviving members and their road manager have vehemently denied the allegation that Morrison exposed himself. Manzarek called it a mass religious hallucination, arguing the context created an atmosphere where people thought they saw what they were led to believe.
Regardless, the consequences were immediate and severe. Canceled concerts, public outrage, and a 16-day trial that concluded in October 1970 with a conviction.
Morrison was sentenced to 6 months in jail and a $500 fine, a conviction he immediately appealed. And the trial gave him this moment of jarring self-awareness about the judicial system. He said, "If I hadn't had unlimited funds, I'd be in jail right now."
A moment of clarity about the limits of his Dionysian freedom.
Right. It took until 2010 for Florida Governor Charlie Crist to issue a complete posthumous pardon.
The Miami incident was the low point, but it spurred the band's creative return. They desperately needed to reconnect with the music.
That led to Morrison Hotel in 1970 and L.A. Woman in 1971, where they returned to their blues rock roots.
Morrison Hotel was a significant return to form a raw blues rock sound that critics immediately praised as their ballsiest and best album to date.
And L.A. Woman became their swan song with Morrison. This album was recorded in a garage-like setting after their longtime producer, Paul Rothchild, quit.
Infamously calling one of the tracks cocktail lounge music.
Yeah. So engineer Bruce Botnick stepped up to co-produce, fostering a looser, bluesier atmosphere. L.A. Woman produced 2 monster hits, Love Her Madly and the darkly atmospheric Riders on the Storm.
And the title track famously features Morrison chanting the anagram of his name, Mr. Mojo Risin'.
A final moment of self-mythologizing.
But the volatility was relentless. Their last performance with Jim Morrison was on December 12, 1970 at the Warehouse in New Orleans.
And that show ended with an alleged onstage breakdown. Morrison started slamming the microphone stand until the stage platform was completely destroyed, then just refused to perform.
After that, the surviving members mutually agreed that live performing had become too dangerous and unpredictable.
They decided to stop touring, as Morrison was ready to retreat from the stage and focus entirely on poetry.
And that leads us to the final, mysterious chapter, The End of the King. After finishing L.A. Woman, Morrison announced he was taking a sabbatical in March 1971 to join Pamela Cresson in Paris.
He took up residency at an apartment on Rue Boutrey in Le Marais. It was intended as a spiritual and creative cleansing. He described going on long walks, attempting to live a quieter life. He shaved his beard, lost weight. He was trying to reinvent himself as a full-time poet.
He was still connected to the band, but the focus had clearly shifted.
John Densmore was the last band member to speak to him by phone, asking about L.A. Woman's commercial performance.
Then, on July 3, 1971, Cresson found him dead in the bathtub of their apartment. He was only 27. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure.
But because French law didn't require an autopsy, the exact cause of death remains perpetually disputed, fueling every subsequent conspiracy theory and ensuring his mythology endures.
The official account provided by Cresson was never fully accepted.
No. Several key figures have offered conflicting accounts. Singer Marianne Faithfull and nightclub manager Sam Burnett both claimed his death was due to an accidental heroin overdose at the nightclub itself.
Burnett claimed his body was moved.
He did. He claimed that Morrison's body was removed by drug dealers and returned to the apartment to cover up the incident and avoid a police inquiry.
And the secrecy surrounding the event just amplified all the speculation.
It did. His friend, the influential French film director Agnès Varda, was instrumental in hiding the incident from the public for several days. This secrecy extended to his burial on July 7, 1971 at Père-Lachaise Cemetery. Varda confirmed she was one of only 4 mourners who attended the private service.
And the secret burial and sudden death cemented his inclusion in the notorious 27 Club.
His death came within 2 years of Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, and Janis Joplin. This clustering of deaths solidified the urban legend, connecting Morrison to this idea of a doomed generation of artists pushing too hard.
Adding a final layer of literary intrigue are the writings recovered after his death, specifically the Paris Journal.
Right, the journal contains poetry and this allegorical foretelling of a man grieving and abandoning his belongings due to a police investigation into a death connected to the Chinese opium trade.
It's eerie.
It's very eerie. The recovered writings emphasize that even in death, Morrison was still the poet, writing himself into a dark, ambiguous narrative.
The mystery surrounding his death naturally draws us to the final resting place. His gravesite at Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris has become one of the most visited literary and rock pilgrimages in the world.
The site is constantly monitored due to vandalism, but the famous headstone placed by his father in 1990 remains. It features that cryptic Greek inscription, Hagasa the Taugates.
Typically translated as true to his own spirit or according to his own demon.
It's the final message from the Apollonian father to the Dionysian son, acknowledging his wild, untamed nature.
And adding another recent historical footnote, the original marble bust placed on his grave, which was stolen in 1988, was recently recovered by Paris police in May of this year, while investigating an unrelated matter.
It's remarkable how his story still generates news decades later.
So what became of the Doors after 1971? The remaining members kept trying to make music together, initially rejecting the idea of replacing Morrison with someone like Iggy Pop.
Who would have been a natural choice given his similar confrontational performance style. But they attempted to continue as a trio. Krieger and Manzarek took over lead vocal duties.
A major challenge.
A huge challenge. There released 2 albums, Other Voices in 1971 and Full Circle in 1972, featuring increased elements of funk and jazz.
And how did the public respond to the Doors without their frontman?
Well, neither album reached the top 10, unlike all 6 of their records with Morrison. The magic, the lightning bolt of the Dionysian chaos was gone. The band eventually disbanded in 1973.
The Apollonian structure couldn't hold the weight of the name without the destructive genius at its center.
Perfect way to put it.
But the ghost of Morrison brought them back together for one highly successful project in 1978.
That was the remarkable An American Prayer. The trio took Morrison's previously recorded spoken word poetry from sessions in 1969 and his 27th birthday and meticulously set it to new music.
A fascinating hybrid of rock and performance art.
And it was a huge commercial success. It achieved platinum status, demonstrating the market's enduring appetite for Morrison's words.
Looking at Morrison's broader legacy, he fundamentally set the benchmark for the rock star persona.
He absolutely codified the prototype, the surly, sexy, scandalous, intellectual anti-hero. His look, particularly the early black leather, became the standardized attire for rock rebellion.
And his influence permeated the underground, specifically the post-punk and gothic scenes.
His voice, that deep, heavy baritone, served as a direct prototype for the gothic rock sound. He influenced a long line of vocalists, from Iggy Pop, whose song The Passenger, this is based on one of Morrison's poems, to Patti Smith, and the dark, introspective vocalists of the late 70s and 80s, like Ian Curtis of Joy Division and Susie Sue.
You can hear the Doors' influence directly connecting to the grunge era too, can't you?
Definitely. Critics noted that the Doors presaged gothic rock due to the violence and darkness in their early work. This translated directly to grunge vocalists like Eddie Vedder, Lane Staley, and Scott Weiland, who inherited that blend of poetic introspection and raw, often anguished stage presence.
Let's track the later careers of Manzarek and Krieger. They were anything but idle after 1973.
No, Robbie Krieger initially formed the Butts Band with John Densmore. He later pivoted heavily into jazz fusion, showcasing his foundational training. He continues to record and tour to this day.
And Manzarek became an accomplished producer, which is often overlooked.
His legacy outside the Doors is substantial, particularly in the punk scene. He produced the first 4 albums for the seminal Los Angeles punk band X. 2 of those albums are on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time.
He was also a successful author.
He was. He wrote his memoir, Light My Fire, and a novel, The Poet in Exile, which explored the persistent rumor that Morrison faked his death.
The 2 surviving instrumentalists continued to collaborate, though they ran into significant legal turbulence with John Densmore and the Morrison estate.
Their reunion started in the early 2000s, initially as the Doors of the 21st century. But legal challenges over the name's commercial use forced them to change it multiple times, eventually settling on Manzarek Krieger.
Yet they remained open to new artistic partnerships, crossing massive genre boundaries.
They did. They worked with electronic music producer Skrillex on the track Breakin' a Sweat in 2012, and with rapper Tech N9 on Strange 2013 using samples of Morrison's vocals. It showed they were still committed to pushing the boundaries of sound.
Finally, we can't ignore Oliver Stone's 1991 biopic, The Doors, which successfully brought the band to a new generation of fans, cementing their legacy.
It was a massive commercial success, and Val Kilmer earned immense praise for his portrayal. Some band members even admitted they sometimes couldn't distinguish Kilmer's voice from Morrison's.
However, the film itself was heavily criticized by the surviving band members and those who knew Jim well.
That was the key critique. Manzarek was particularly outspoken, claiming the movie depicted a fictionalized Jimbo Morrison the drunk and failed to capture the sensitive poet, the humor, or the intellectual rigor.
It focused solely on the Dionysian destructive side,
Without capturing the Apollonian genius. David Crosby, a contemporary, recorded a song about the film with the telling lyric, and I have seen that movie and it wasn't like that.
So we have synthesized the story of this volatile convergence, a band built on the shared foundation of film school, philosophy, flamenco, and Eastern spirituality. What is the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener?
The core tension of the Doors narratives is that spectacular, creative collision of high art and profound, destructive chaos. You had Jim Morrison, steeped in Artaud, Rimbaud, and Nietzsche-pure Dionysian fire, colliding with Manzarek's polymath keyboard skills and Krieger's genre-bending musicality.
The Apollonian structure.
Exactly. They distilled the entire intellectual and counterculture energy of the 1960s, the philosophy, the film, the poetry, the rebellion, and packaged it into this raw, unpredictable rock music format. It was a fusion so intense, so reliant on a personality that broke every limit, that it became unsustainable and ultimately fractured its creators.
The enduring power of their music is absolutely inseparable from the drama of Morrison's self-created persona. They needed the instability, but the instability eventually consumed the engine of the chaos.
Right.
And that leads to our final provocative thought for you to consider. The Doors officially disbanded in 1973, yet their biggest commercial hits and sales surges occurred after Morrison's death, with An American Prayer in 1978, and again with the Oliver Stone film revival in 1991.
So the question becomes,
How much of the Doors' massive ongoing legacy is built solely on the incredible music recorded between 1967 and 1971, and how much is truly cemented by the eternal, unresolved mystery of the brilliant, tragic poet who died young and became an indestructible myth?
it's the question that continues to break on through the other side of rock history. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.